Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started with the second roundtable. Thank you all for being here today for this roundtable. Just to shortly give a quick, two-word explanation, this roundtable will deal with the question of feminist archiving and transmission. So questions of how can we rethink how we archive what we archive and how we activate that knowledge to transmit it for new knowledges. Through a feminist perspective, of course. The format of this roundtable will be a bit different. It's divided into 3 chapters. Each chapter will be moderated by either Eugene, Sneha, or Caroline. So I'll let them take the floor. I believe we will be beginning with Eugene.
Hello? You can hear me well? Everyone's here? Yeah, okay. Hi, I'm Eugene Hannah Park from AppStar, and I want to kind of start by sharing you the processes of how we prepared a question. So Aware team asked me to work with a group about the idea of constituting archives. So I bring the 3, the names are not here, but I asked members how should we bring up some question about constituting archives. And we discussed a lot about how archive job is related to time. Because when we put archive and job together, it feels like a very mundane job. It's slow. It could be very invisible. And sometimes there is a misunderstanding that the archival practices is not urgent, not something urgent, and it doesn't respond to what is happening in the current world. But yet we still travel with archive. When we hold it, when we flip it, when we read it, when we touch it, we do the time travels and we find a way to connect to the present moments with our bodies, and we resonate the conversations as try to amplify the echoes of the archives in a way. So our questions that I'm going to share right now, but I want to share it to you guys. There are 2 questions. First is how does our everyday urgency relate to time? And second question is, how do you find persistence in our time with archival acts or matters? So I'm curious what our groups is going to present. So yeah, I'll pass down the mic to, next slide, the Feminist Institute.
Hi, everyone. I love these questions, and I really think for me it's important to place persistence, urgency, and time within the context and history of feminist gatherings and networks such as NEST. Pictured here, you can see a pamphlet from the Conference on Women in the Arts. Closer? Okay. From April 20th to 22nd in 1972. This event was co-organized by the artists Mary Beth Edelson, Josephine Withers, Barbara Frank, Yvonne Wolfe, Cynthia Bickley-Green, Susan Solins, and Edith Sanford. This event was held at the Corcoran Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., and was seen as a national forum to create connections, exchange ideas, and promote further engagement among the participants and beyond, which I think sounds familiar to all of us here at NEST. In her post-conference write-up, Edelson discussed leaderless and fluid sessions that took hours to decide the simplest of things. She noted that the urgency and profundity of the moment stood in direct opposition with the brief amount of time they had, stating, "Perhaps there is never time to exchange ideas at leisure with individuals from around the country. Perhaps it was only wishful thinking on our part. But when it was all over, we wanted to carry on, and it was too late. I sensed that many felt this way. When it was time to end, we were just beginning." We are lucky to have this booklet and Edelson's postmortem thanks to the primary source documentation from the planning of this event that Edelson saved. The Feminist Institute worked with her to preserve this studio archive back in 2018. As a result of this work, many of these materials are available publicly on our website, and the physical documentation lives at Fales Library at New York University. As such, as I thought about the nature of this question, it brought me back to Edelson's quote about time. Archivists are often not afforded the luxury of time, even in traditional institutional settings. Prominent archival processing literature centers around the concept of more product and less process, or the golden minimum of what is the least we can do to get the job done in a way that is adequate to our users' needs. Thinking back to TFI's work with Edelson, most of her records, analog records, were stored in impeccably organized file cabinets, which is quite rare when we're working with primary source documentation. However, she had boxes of deteriorating audiovisual materials, of which the most recent formats that were shot in the early to mid 2000s and were in the worst condition, and in many cases could not be saved. She also left multiple hard drives with important digital materials that were no longer usable in the state in which they were left. Documents and printed photographs, if left in a shoebox in normal environmental conditions, can last for generations. Working with analog materials in that sense can have a certain passive persistence. But I worry about the digital documentation developed by feminist artists and activist groups and how their work and struggles could be lost not only to time, but to misinformation, cyber attacks, and rapidly shifting technology. In that way, I find persistence and advocacy for this work. Through my work with the Feminist Institute, we've created archival programs and partnerships that center on ethics of care, including spaces where feminists can preserve their audiovisual materials in our memory lab. We also really make it a point to lead workshops that advocate for personal digital archiving. Archivists are information activists who aim to make sure that people's efforts and stories persist in the face of multiple forms of opposition and resistance to truth-telling. I am one person amongst a series of people before and after me who aim to ensure that information is freely available. That said, ensuring persistence with digital documentation is a trust exercise in which we hope that the next generation will continue maintaining these records in spite of changes in technology. In the face of this uncertain persistence, leaning into that trust is really an inherently feminist act.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Sneha Raghavan, and I'm a researcher with Asia Archive in India. And the question of time and archives is really sort of, there's so many different ways in which we can think about it. I mean, there is the time, there's archive time, there's time of sort of just being in the archive, looking at material. There's the time of the document itself. There's the time of the event and its relationship to the archive. Is the archive, and does it come in the aftermath of an event? Can we think about the archive as the event is progressing? I think these are questions that we constantly think about. And so it's very much sort of a question of being in this unique and almost impossible sort of position of straddling, the past, the present, and the future. And each of these come with their own imaginaries, their own urgencies, their own precarities. And so it's, I think that's sort of the space in which we are all of the time. One of the things that I wanted to share was also, I mean, there are a few broad contexts in which we carry out some of the work that we do, and just to share a few of them, one of our sort of main concerns is to see how material from personal archives that people have in their homes, artists, scholars, curators, independent sort of arts initiatives, how can we bring them out into the public domain? Because as we know, we don't really have many public sort of institutions that are doing this work. So the question of making sort of this material accessible by bringing it out from the personal sort of spaces into the public is something that's important. But at the same time, as we work on personal archives of individuals, we're also very keen to ensure that we're not just centering narratives around those individuals themselves, but really using that personal archive as a window into sort of a larger field, larger communities, larger milieus. And I think so it's not just about building the archive, it's also about framing, it's about narrating, it's about speculating with the archive and drawing connections between multiple archives where connections may not seem immediately apparent as well. The other thing that I think, the other narrative that I think we're very keen to also sort of push is that there's this sort of perception that's been commonly, I mean, and I think that's been most, aggressively pushed by the art market, which is that artists only make work. And we all know that that's not the case. Artists do much more than the making of artwork. They organize, they curate, they write, they teach, they work collaboratively. And so to push back against this definition is something that I think we strive to sort of do. And in that sense, we are inspired very much by artists and how they approach structures, forms, and events. So just to give you an example, at AAA, I think in 2018, we had invited the Guerrilla Girls for an intervention, and they looked at sort of, they did a survey of sort of gender, I mean, the statistics of gender representation across various institutions in Hong Kong, including Asiata Archive, where it was really revealed that the question of gender was actually one of the biggest sort of blind spots in the way that we were building our sort of archival collections. And we took it as a moment to sort of realign some of our research and content priorities from that point onwards. And I just want to share two sort of archival collections coming from the context of India that really sort of, that came out of that process of realigning some of our research priorities. So in the context of India, in the 70s and the 80s, you had the women's movement that really sort of made a big sort of attempt to sort of push back against crimes, you know, against women, and artists and the ways that they engaged with it was something that we really found sort of illuminating. So, and this was also the moment where we saw sort of the intersection of art, performance, and activism. And so for us, these kinds of histories and these kinds of narratives are not a given. They're something that we constantly have to keep sort of producing and framing, and sort of not wait for somebody from outside to come in and do that work, but as researchers to really do this ourselves. So yeah.
Thank you. When we were brainstorming this panel and thinking about time and urgency, I was thinking about our work. My name is Martha Kazungu. I'm the founding director of Njabala Foundation. Many people struggle to pronounce the word Njabala because it's a Ugandan word. And the title of our work was intentional, thinking about archives, to really remove this decolonial mentality that art is for others, right? So many Ugandans struggle with art because they don't know what it means, because it's, you know, titled in English, because it's priced in dollars. You know, there's a lot of exclusion. And so calling ourselves Njabala, a folklore, a story told in Uganda to girls growing up, to teach them how they can, you know, be custodians of patriarchy, was for us a site of resistance. And we consider our life and activity as a living archive, if you like. So the exhibitions we make, the research projects we do are all anchored in the ethos of this story, which is, of course, told orally, but now with our foundation and with our work, we try to then to narrate it and have it on our website, so you can quickly read the story on our website at Njabala Foundation. But thinking really about who we are, about how we survive, the urgency, the time, it's like all these things are constantly in our consciousness because we operate in a system where art is a luxury. You know, there are more urgent things like roads, transport, healthcare, food, you know. So for you to insist that art is necessary, it's always something that's really ignored, not only by the presidents and the political system, but also by individuals who don't have the access to white walls and to gallery spaces as we know them. So a lot of our work really is accepting the reality of where we exist. And the picture that you see on the screen is a remnant of a performance. It's a yellow gown made out of sacks of sugar. So in Uganda, when you're born a girl, your parents are told, congratulations, because you have a girl child. From as early as having one day, you're already a problem because your family is expecting you that when you become a teenager, or when you become at the marriage age, you're going to be exchanged for sugar, right? And at a very, very early age, girls are experiencing this kind of tragedy, in my opinion, to just be a woman in that community. And fast forward, as a young girl, you're told how to be efficient, how you have to work hard, how you have to manage to be a worker, and it's constantly, constantly expected to work. So this artwork that you see on the picture, the artist Sandra Subi actually repurposed, sacks of sugar, and then asked women who are in marriages to ask them, is it as ideal as it's portrayed, as early as when you're born? And so many, of course, there were so many misconceptions, and this artwork is a living archive of these narratives. The picture is unfortunately not as clear, but these women embroider their experiences on the gown, and then the gown is worn, and there's a performance in the street of Kampala as she's passing around in the market systems, in the slum areas where women would never ever access a gallery system, see the work and encounter it, and they're surprised, why a yellow gown? We are used to a white gown. So many things are happening in the same picture. So when I was told to submit the one picture that can kind of encapsulate our being, I thought this was a powerful analogy, even, if you like, to kind of give you an impulse for who we are and how the work we do is an emblem of archiving. And if I have some more time, beyond the exhibitions, this was our first exhibition in 2022. We are a very young organization. We are 3 years old. We do exhibitions, we do research projects. We're currently in phase 2 of a research project called Women Artists from 1960s in Africa. We are partnering with AWARE. And we had our symposium back in Kampala this March with the same. Phase 1 was funded by the University of Birmingham in the UK, where we also did the research project. The other thing we do is mentorship, because Uganda is a very young country. Politically, we are 60 years old, but even people, like we have 70% of our citizens below 30 years of age. So we have a very young energy, and people are constantly in need of mentorship and opportunities. And of course, finally, all our work is really about community engagement, but we also set across specific projects to kind of encounter communities in different parts of the country.
Thank you. So I will pass it to the next questions. Yeah.
Thanks, Eugene. Hi, my name's Caroline Phillips. I'm from the Women's Art Register in Australia. My colleague Meryn is on the panel and will speak about our organisation. But I'm going to ask 2 questions to 2 different structures of our network today. And the theme of this portion of the panel, this chapter, is challenge. And firstly, I just want to acknowledge that so many of the members of our network have faced enormous challenges to even be here. Situations of war and oppression, illness, difficulties, and also to acknowledge the challenges I think that AWARE has faced in putting this together. So I guess that's just a background context, underneath what everyone is talking about. And just a big shout out to Nina and Caro as well, and all the team have done a fantastic job. Sorry, we just go back to Nicole. So the first question I have is to Nicole Fernandez-Vera, who is the co-president of the Centre Audiovisuel Simone de Beauvoir, and pardon my terrible accent. And part of, I guess, the challenges we're looking at is actually down to the nitty-gritty of archiving, which is the materiality of what we work with. And yes, time is a really great part of the question, but also how do we care for the materials that actually document our activism and our advocacy. And in the case of your organisation, you're working with digital materials. So is there something in particular that's a challenge for you with the materiality of those items, and anything else you'd like to talk to us about the challenges that you face?
Thank you for the introduction. I just want to make a correction. I'm not the general director, but the co-president, as you said. The general director is in the room, Barbara Alves-Rangel. Oh, hello. And my colleague Peggy. I just want to explain why I chose this photo. It's a montage. You can see on the left, above the left, Delphine Seyrig, who is one of the co-founders of Simone de Beauvoir Audiovisual Center. Delphine Seyrig was an actress, but also a video director and a feminist and human rights activist. On the side, there is a videotape from the beginning of the video. That's mean in the end of the 60s, so it was quite huge and big. And you see Delphine editing a very well-known film directed by her, Be Pretty and Shut Up, made in the 70s about the actresses in United States, Canada, and France. And I think that you recognize Jane Fonda. So you see two images. One is the image before the restoration of the video. So you see that it's not clear, it's like not very good. And the second image is after restoration, because I'm going to talk about restoration of video. Okay, so collecting, preserving, distributing, and restoring feminist and LGBTQ archives, video and film, is really a fascinating project. It's never boring when you are doing it. It's about remembering, passing on, and reappropriating a history that is often invisible. I use the term reappropriation because for me, transmission is like it's like between old people and young people, like transmission. I think that reappropriation, it's in both senses. The specificity of audiovisual archive is obviously the medium. Audiovisual support leads to specific questions with major question of conservation and restoration. It's also a medium that is more expensive economically and requires specific equipment for reading, for reproducing, and restoring. When I talk about medium, I should say media because there is a multitude of them, which makes the task a little bit more complicated. In the case of films and video made by feminists of LGBTQ people, there is a lot of self-production. This means that it's a more fragile economy and sometimes poor conservation of the support due to a lack of resources. I think that many people are going to talk about resources and money because it's really important for archiving. On the positive side, and there is many positive sides in archiving feminist archives, there is a wide range of documentary. As at the center, we mainly keep documentaries, but also experimental films. Diversity, I mean diversity in terms of the subject that can be tackled in other areas of cinema, and also in terms of country, because we can find video and film everywhere in the world. There is also the question of making them available to an international public, so adaptation and subtitling are part of the center mission to ensure maximum accessibility. The advantage in the, between feminist and LGBT people is there is a lot of exchange system, like, I don't know the word in English, troc. Somebody need troc? We exchange without money. You just trade? Okay. So exchange without money, important to notice that. The other major issue is this work of historical, social, and political context of film. The documentation made available to researchers and student journalists is a priority. And there is also a question that all feminists and LGBT people are aware of, is that the question of thesaurus, you know, all the terms that you use to find archives or books or films or photos of what you want. And you know that all the thesaurus, so it's a compilation of words. It's always very heterocentric, and also, I don't know if you use this word, Occidental-centric or white-centric. You know what I mean. So there is a whole intellectual work around the world to be used for searching and indexes all these resources. And I think it's really a very important question that we have to share between us and to make a very feminist and LGBT terrorist a mondial, I think, all over the world. If you have all these issues in mind, and if you love feminist and LGBT video and cinema, I think that everybody loves that, it's a real pleasure to work with a collection like the one of the Audiovisual Center Simone de Beauvoir, which is unique in the world. Yes, it's true. And growing every year. So it's not an archive like an archive in a closet, so it's always growing. This collection is growing thanks to the confidence of feminist and LGBTQ plus directors, producers, and distributors. And we have also to thank the collaboration of the French National Library because they digitalize and restore some of our video when it's possible. So you see that like a little association, we are really ambitious, but we are a little association. And so we can work with a big organism, public organism like French National Library. So I always say that we have to find money where there is money and material and people working on that. Archiving in a feminist and LGBT way is a practice of collective and militant reappropriation for new project, new film, and new research. The audiovisual archive makes it possible to see and hear a range of struggles, ideas, stories, representation, and emotion. I think that emotion, it's important. So I just conclude by long life our audiovisual heritage, or in French, vive le matrimoine audiovisuel. J'ai pas trouvé de mot en anglais pour matrimoine, donc j'ai fait l'impasse. I don't find a word in English for matrimoine, which is a patrimoine is like pater in Latin. Everybody speaks Latin, no? So it's like patriarcha, matriarcha. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. I think we have matriarchy. Is that what you mean? But anyway.
No, but it's patrimoine, matrimoine. It doesn't.
Different. We'll work on
Sorry, it's really French.
No, that's okay. And I meant to say at the beginning, you've been going since 1982, just for some more info. I guess there's a contrast, a lot of groups here from all around the world, and the difference between some organisations on the western side and on the eastern side, or with institutional support, or those without. So my next question is directed to Iga Zhishpanska. Now, Iga is representing the foundation Katarzyna Kozira, which is also known, and the secondary archive from Warsaw in Poland. And they started in 2012, and perhaps a very, very different story. So, Iga, you've done projects in collaboration with artists in the Ukraine, and you've specialised in the use of a first-person archive. So what can you tell us about what that means and how that is the work that you have to do to capture an archive in that format?
Thank you very much for your question. So yes, Katarzyna Kozira Foundation was established in 2012, and we worked with Ukrainian artists and curators on numerous projects. But then Secondary Archive was established a few years back, and it's a platform consisting of first-person statements by female artists or female identifying artists from Central and Eastern Europe. Most of the statements are written by the artists themselves. Those who are sadly not with us anymore, curators still try to use first-person writings left behind, so they work with the archive of the artist. So it's really important for us to think how art history can be written by women and how it can be written by artists themselves. Of course, we love art historians, but I think this perspective sometimes is lost in the process. When it comes to working on the archive, we work with local experts and partners. So we have 11 international partners. For the context of working with Ukraine, we collaborate with an amazing partner, Artsfit Gallery. And we made 2 launches with Ukraine. Both of them were founded by House of Europe. And the first launch, the event, which was online, happened literally a few hours before the full-scale invasion. So we had the presentation in the evening, and in the morning we woke up to the news. And then the second extension was done this year, already with an ongoing war. And the title of the extension was Women Artists in War specifically. So we focused a lot in the statements on the experience of war, of working in war and preserving art in such a precarious situation. For us, we are very lucky with our partners. So one thing that's super amazing to see is that our partners are still active. At first, similar to Heaven for Artists, they turned their space into a transitory space for food and supplies. But now they are back to organizing exhibitions, events, public programs. So it's still running. And they were very open to making this second extension, and we are very happy to collaborate together in that aspect. What was very important for us is that we had to have a lot of flexibility. And that's something that is kind of a message to grant givers, etc. You cannot work with deadlines when there's a war going on. You cannot work... Thank you. And you cannot work with certain parameters, with Excels. Like, of course this can happen, but our accountant didn't have electricity. How is she going to finish an Excel when she's on the front line in a way? So I think it's also very important for all of us to think how important such archiving methodologies are in the conflict zones, because certain artists literally die in the war. Their archives are destroyed, their studios are bombed, or museums are being bombed, so the work is being destroyed in that material way. So the archiving is very important, but then how we approach it, we cannot translate the methodologies we have now into those working with people experiencing such situations. So I think there's a lot of like this radical empathy and care and listening and learning from one another, and really reminding each other that this is ongoing, that I think it's also something that media is very interested in for the first 6 months, but the war in Ukraine is still going on, and there are other conflicts happening that might also not get media coverage at all. So there's that aspect as well. So I think, yes, approaching it with a lot of openness and care is really important. So I would all invite you to go to the secondary archive and read the statements by Ukrainian artists, which I think can give us a very enriching and beautiful input on how they navigate the situation. And also another aspect is that we invited the artists from the previous extension that if they want to, they can add something to their first statements, because that's something also that's growing. So the archive is growing with them, and it's going to probably change in a lot of ways. And again, also to support those who are in such a precarious situation, you can go to Artsfit Gallery website as well, and other artists based in Ukraine who have regular donations and open calls for support on their websites.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah. Now I will pass over to Sneha, who had some more questions.
Okay, so the group of people that we are going to be speaking to now, this section is called Activating Archives. And I mean, of course, with archives, the common misconception is that archives are static repositories, but I think what we've heard from so many of our speakers here today, we know very well that we're no longer working with those older models of thinking about archives as these big dusty spaces, waiting for people to come in. I think people are activating things from the get-go. People are activating materials even before collections are being built. sometimes activating may be just thought of as forms of transmitting knowledge. So I think that is something that we're going to be hearing from several of our speakers here, and the various forms in which all of them, both critically and creatively sort of think through this question of activation. And so we have first up, we have Simona Dvorak, who's speaking on behalf of the Initiative for Practices and Visions of Radical Care. And one of the things that we were speaking about earlier was this sort of this process of gathering stories from the margins, thinking about sort of artistic practice and how it can intervene in daily life. Could you maybe speak a little bit to some of the forms that you've been working with? Yeah.
Thank you, Sneha. So I will start just to introduce very shortly our initiative, just to let you know a little bit more about the origin. So Initiative for Practices and Visions of Radical Care was created in 2020 during the first lockdown in the region of the Greater Paris. And we are working since this beginning as a broad ecosystem of diverse practitioners from the art field, but also therapists, journalists, or lawyers. So it's a really very large group. And all together we are working around the notions as care or solidarity, but also on the institutional sustainability and sustainability of so-called life-affirming practices. Which means for us exploring the diasporic conditions and working on inclusion of artists who have a different economic and social status, and that also came in Greater Paris because of the forced displacement. And so this brings me also to this question of the archives, because what is very specific for us, we don't have any physical archive, we don't have even any physical space as our initiative, and so we are rather speaking about a living archive in our case that is something in the opposition to the archive as an institution of power. So also this white power maybe, or what also Nicole said, so it's also thinking differently how we can challenge the archive, the constitution of archive, which can be very patriarchal project actually. So we bring collectively the stories of our members of the initiative who have witnessed the profound social injustice, oppression or war conditions. And this can take different forms or format. We are gathering the formats and skills that can be the crafts, it can be music, speculation, but also cooking or astrology, but also traditional formats as performance or drawing or also simply memory. And the activation of these archives always depends on the situation. It may be a very personal narrative, but it can be also the public moment as an exhibition, it can be a publication, it can be the assembly, performance, but it's always in the response of what's happening right now in the world. So we are always responding to the current emergencies. As curators, we can also share in this sense our privilege, which is related to the contemporary art field, that is also a sort of advantage of the visibility that we can bring into this situation and into these stories that are very important and very often invisible actually. For example, I can mention our participation in Colombo's Cup in Sri Lanka with our members, Miriam Mindu, that you will see here tonight actually, she'll have a performance. She collaborated with Tafik Sedigi, who is a journalist from Afghanistan and also our member of Initiative, and who make a documentation of her performance. Or another example, it can be the participation of Initiative in the exhibition called then solidarity is not a metaphor that you could maybe see in the Venice Biennial this year that was curated by Natasha Petreshin-Bachelet. And we as Initiative, we prepared a program of heart-to-heart conversations, inviting our members like Magdi Masara, who is from Sudan, and who were discussing the situation of ongoing civil war. And he was speaking also about his project, which is called Durmonga, and it's a project of education for everyone, and also of health infrastructure. So he's actually building the infrastructures for the people who are in the refugees camps in Chad and in Sudan. But we also collaborating with established artists that also working around this question of the memory and the narratives. I can name, for example, Olivier Marbeuf, who work also on the archive, which is an archive of the silence voices during the time of the slavery, but also beyond the time of the slavery. Or Paula Valero Comin, who is also here with us in the public, and who is bringing in her work the voices of the women that are fighting against the fascism, which is very important also and very actual right now, actually. Or Bani Khoshnoudi, who is an Iranian filmmaker, and she is bringing the voices of Iranian women just fighting now for freedom. Or Sharwei Tsai, who is working with the indigenous community in Taiwan. Or Catherine Radosa, who is working here in Paris on the ecological urgencies that are related to the big projects of it's a kind of urbanization, it's a betonization of the green of field in Paris, which is very tragical and which is also ongoing situation. So this is the stories of these voices and the witnessing, but it can be also the object that I, for example, wearing right now, which is, we call this the portable sculpture, which is from Ismail Afghan, who is also from Afghanistan. And so we are wearing this sculpture from Ismail, and for us it's a way of transmitting the stories, because it can be public moment, but it can be also private. I can just also, or we can also just tell these stories in a very personal way through these objects. Or maybe the last example, it can be the work of other member, Barbara Manzetti, who creates written and performative objects together with the project called Restez étrangère, which is based in Saint-Denis in a big house, which is a house of family, of people arriving in France, but without any legal documents, that share together their memory through recipes, gardening, drawing, or language. And this is again this idea of life-affirming practices, because she also I should stop, sorry. I see. So I will just finish to say that the initiative, what is important, it's a situated practice, situated in the Greater Paris region, it's situated in the diasporic histories and the diasporic dimension. And so also this archive is very specific, and it's an archive which is deeply diasporic. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Simona. Okay, next up we have Sun Park, and who'll be speaking about Afsar. And I think one of the amazing things that I learned through some of our meetings, online, as well as speaking to so many of you yesterday, was sort of this model of the study group, and which I learned was also inspired by historical models, but foregrounding peer-to-peer learning and sort of discourse and discord studies. So could you speak a little bit to sort of your practice?
Sure. Hello, is this working? Cool. My name is San. I'm gonna try to stick to my notes because I don't want to miss out on any of the words that our members have shared with me. Today I'm speaking on behalf of AFSAR. AFSAR is a collective that takes a fluid shape and constantly shape shifts, even as I speak right now. For instance, during the conference here, we've been asked this question a lot: how many people are in your group? Our answer always has to be, we don't know, because we really don't know and it's impossible to know. And also, it happened to be that a lot of members with East Asian heritage was able to be in the space physically, but actually a lot of members in AFSAR are from and reside in many different places outside of East Asia. So basically, we don't have any physical base. AFSAR began in 2021 with the aim of activating feminist discourse across academia, community spaces, and art. We've hosted numerous public and virtual activities, primarily on our Discord channel. Currently, there are about 12 study groups and over 30 conversation channels where diverse conversations unfold. To address the question of archival activation, I must acknowledge that AFSAR doesn't have any physical archive or collection. But there are a lot of bodies that carry an archive of one's own, as Olivier Marbeuf said. We want to call these bodies keepers and transmitters of knowledge, memories, and lived experiences. In essence, our archives come alive through the acts of keeping and transmitting our personal micro-archives. Many of us joined AFSAR out of frustration with existing knowledge systems that are hierarchical, exclusionary, and perpetuating inequality. As one member puts it, our work in AFSAR is like wandering through knowledge together. No one directs us, so we learn, teach, and grow collectively. Each keeper and transmitter activates the archive in their own way, in formats that suit their unique needs. There's no imposed structure or uniformity. Therefore, our peer-led practices are inherently horizontal, decentralized, and rhizomic, but at the same time unruly. This means that our archive is constantly losing control and letting things disappear as much as we keep and transmit them. For us, archive workers, also known as hoarders, this idea of disappearance is unsettling, but we've learned that we are archiving through relations, not just preservation. The word that best describes this approach is friendship. Diasporic friendships have a way of bringing back pieces of ourselves we thought were lost. For those of us navigating distortion, friends become memory workers. In friendships, we become both keepers and transmitters of each other's mutable stories. I would like to close this response for AFSAR's future, a question that we want to bring into our future. Can an archive be built not on what is collected, but on what is shared?
Thank you. Thank you for that. Okay. Next up, we have Alejandra Moreno, who will be from La Leca, which is a feminist, artistic, and prison abolitionist collective founded by artists and researchers. I think I was thinking about some of the things that Alejandra has spoken over yesterday, but also before, about sort of radical pedagogies and critical activations, but in the context of the sort of the prison abolition movement, and some of the things, some of the performances and how sort of you've spoken about it were so powerful. So could you say a little bit more about your practice? Yes.
Gracias. Voy a leer la respuesta en inglés. Muchos de ustedes saben que no hablo inglés, así que ténganme paciencia y me va a traducir esto que acabo de decir.
I'm going to read my je sais pas quoi d'ailleurs.
Oh. Yeah, Caro.
In English, because I don't speak English. I'm from Mexico and I speak Spanish, so I just apologize for reading.
Yes. So Alejandra will be reading from a statement she's prepared in English. As some of us know, English is not her primary language and a language that she struggled with. So she asked for patience and to bear with us.
Thanks. La colectiva La Yeca is a feminist, artistic, and abolitionist collective founded and nurtured by Lorena Méndez and Fernando Carifuentes. Since 2004, it has generated tools for artistic intervention and accompaniment through performance, generation of situated knowledge, and pedagogy of care with diverse group of men, women, and LGBTQ+ people in complex spaces, such as confinement, prisons, streets, schools, borders, psychiatric hospitals, universities, and detention agencies. Lorena Méndez and Fernando Carifuentes, based on locking and the state's commitment to security, was to strengthen the police force and creation of more reclusion spaces. They often to go to the hardcore of the problem, the prisons, and respond by being inside, by intervening in these spaces. They have often transformed territories that seemed not very fertile and ruptured the cranes of an of the state institution that is maintained because it seems like a necessary evil. At this first moment, the prison authorities allowed the camera to enter, to record and take photographs. This is how the digital archive started. The methodology we follow involves not only security, but also maintenance and care of the archive. We understand preservation not only in material terms, but also in the ability to turn to the archives and reserves and response from it based on our history and our diverse disciplinary approaches. The more it is researched, consulted, and spread, the better it is preserved. Although the translations and plots are different from that we all like. Likewise, it is important for us to make room for fiction, oral memories, and distortion memories when we share the archive in exhibitions, in books, in consultation. It is important for us to accompany the meeting with talks and workshops to draw people's attention to what they will encounter. A fundamental strategy is that those represent in the archive look at themselves, especially when they are outside the prison, and recognize their own stories. In the futures, we hope that the exhibition will be held in a detention center. It is very important for us to have an archive of people who apparently do not have the right to be represented and cared for, as well as their sensibility memories. At the same time, we do not seek to aesthetize, idealize, or atone for prison or aggressors, but to show the possibility of new ways of the relationships away from patriarchal system and violence. For La Yeca, our tools are radical pedagogy, emotional listening, feminist theory, abolition theory, Zapatista knowledge, emotion theory, and radical tenderness. La YECA sigue resistiendo para hacer lo que hacemos, a pesar de la exclusión y el amedrentamiento del Estado, con ternura y comprensión.
Thank you. To quickly translate, Alejandra, I hope I got all of it. La YECA keeps resisting against these patriarchal structures with radical care, with love.
And we have our last speaker of this roundtable. We have Maren Ricketson from the Women's Art Register, which is based in Melbourne and is Australia's living archive of women's art practice. The Women's Art Register are a not-for-profit, artist-run community and resource with an open and inclusive policy of collecting items from all artists who identify as women, cis and trans-inclusive, or gender diverse. Given how many decades of experience or how many decades the Women's Art Register has been around for, I imagine that there are so many ways in which you have, the question of activation has been sort of tested in so many different ways. But if there is one aspect that I think that you will be speaking about today, it is that of pedagogy. So could I request you to?
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Aware, for this opportunity. Yes, education is one of our central roles. And as stated, next year, the Women's Art Register will be celebrating its 50th anniversary. And since 1975, we've documented, researched, archived, expanded, repaired, published, and planned events around our largely paper-based collection. Only recently have we started digitisation. This, of course, represents, like most of the organisations here, hours and thousands of hours of passionate, unpaid volunteer work by a committee and by countless volunteers over those 50 years. In our tiny, cramped office, we hold the archives to over 5,000 artists who identify, as you said, as women or gender diverse and are Australian-based, or whose work has been Australian-based. And there is no selection criteria, so we represent all media, all processes, all techniques, all content. Our earliest artist represented is Teresa Walker, who migrated with her family and lived between 1804 to 1878. Of course, Australia, having an Indigenous history of between 60,000 and 4,000 years, is not the oldest artist that we could have in our collection. Access and use of the collection is absolutely central. It's used by researchers, academics, teachers, students, other artists, curators, historians, and museum staff. In the 70s, 80s and 90s, getting our material into schools was our main aim, getting it onto those curriculums that had no women represented. Textbooks used in Australian classrooms and in art, as I say, in art history curriculums, mentioned either very few women or no women at all. Sadly, this is often the case in Australia still, and certainly across the world. Over a decade, we produced over 6 education resource kits comprising, I know this is incredibly old technology, but comprising slides by artists and an information booklet such as, information booklets like these. As I say, very old technology, but they were particularly significant at the time. Oh, very significant at the time. Okay, I've only got 10 pages more. The artists selected were major professional artists in their field. Just one moment. Sorry. Should have had a stapler here. And these kits were very significant. Perhaps one of the most significant was this one, because it was looking at Indigenous artists and came out of a long collaboration with Aboriginal educators and artists. And the book is actually interviews with artists speaking to students in their own words. Through the years, we also sent slides of works by individual artists across Australia to art institutions, to museums. So bit by bit, we were slowly redressing the neglect and invisibility in both curriculum content and museum programs. Our work in public education continues today, and my colleague Caroline Phillips instigated this wonderful, wonderful project. There's very little information for older artists to manage their careers or estate planning. And this workbook that came out of research and workshops is a book that one can work through looking at all sorts of aspects of your practice, legal aspects, copyright, estate planning, and this has also been circulated widely to artists. So to further look at our work, I hope you will go onto our website and see what else that we do. Thank you.
Well, good evening, and it feels really great to be here, so thank you all for coming. So I have a few poetic thoughts after this week and participating. This is not, okay. Some poetic thoughts, personal thoughts about this week and my experience among the participants in this NEST network. So NEST Network for Empowerment, Solidarity, and Trans-Regionality had its first in-person conference with 20 nonprofit organizations and independent structures from around the globe. That in itself is historic. I don't think something like this in the past was possible. We now have an incredible internet. We've been meeting for months, at least a whole year. Well, I started early spring, and it was kind of an amazing and new experience to be able to communicate that way. And we were all working in the intersection of visual arts, activism, and gender studies. I wanted to talk a little bit about a network of ecosystem. Ecosystems are dynamic structures. However, they are vulnerable to timely disturbances and are constantly recovering from past disturbances. The ecosystem's resilience is adapting to disturbances and reorganizing while retaining its structure, identity, and feedback. Visual culture equivalent of a network's ability to consistently transform collectivity, technology, and utilize other input materials and innovation is to offer new artistic practices and networks of support. There are several ways to measure this. A relatively simple one is to witness creative exchanges through documentation, archives, verbal and written exchanges within the network, and new forms of primary artistic production offered to the public. After participating in virtual monthly meetings for half a year, which were going on for a whole year, and discussing sustainability and growth, and this week's first in-person conference, one felt as though they had joined an ecosystem of culture. We were 21 nonprofit organizations and independent structures, with more than double that number of individuals working within these structures. Biomimicry. An image of a spider in their nest emerged metaphorically during yesterday's discussion. Spiders are necessary for maintaining the balance of the ecosystem, from controlling undesirable populations to providing food for others. These tiny arachnids are vital contributors to the health and stability of our current environment. The intricate structures of spider webs have encouraged the development of materials with remarkable strength and flexibility. The spider's silk web are known for their extraordinary strength and elasticity and the hopes for a future of creating new materials for versatile applications. By studying spiders, humans can learn valuable lessons in design, efficiency, that can be useful to various applications. It is also noted that spiders protect their eggs in silk egg sacs. If a female spider cannot care for her eggs, other female spiders move in to protect the sacs by attaching them to their webs and hiding them in their nests. Another development of yesterday's conversation was the lively and authentic debate over defining feminist intersectionality. Each person present was given time to discuss the social and political identity, including but not limited to unique combinations of circumstance, discriminations, and privilege. The result was inspiring, understanding how our group can learn from each other and work together without needing to agree. Even the fatigue of the long day did not dampen my enthusiasm to continue to develop plans for a future and supportive nest and to facilitate a social ecosystem and changes and challenges. So I want to say it was a very difficult day, and I am going to say that last night I went to sleep reading an article about a white nationalist, Nick Fuentes, a very close friend of Trump's and probably will be appointed to his cabinet, posted on X, "Your body, my choice, forever." He blatantly boasted that that men will now legally control women's bodies, and for the rest of the night, his post received at least 22,000 likes. That is just horrifying, blatant, and it made me realize just how relevant and urgent this infrastructure, this ecosystem, this spider's web that we call nest needs to be and be strong and keep going. Because when I woke up this morning and I was having breakfast and greeted by my new friends last night, I felt a new sense of warmth and kindness and connectivity. And I think that we all know the future can be rough. And I just jotted this down for the group from Mexico, like Trump's promise to create the largest mass deportation of immigrants in history moved the prices of private prison companies up 41% yesterday. Another horrifying fact in the way that we are all being manipulated by other kinds of structures. So with that, I'm going to say, really thank you all for making all of this worthwhile and keep on producing.